Continuing on with federalism. Ching. In this video, I want to talk about drawbacks to a federal system of government, of federalism, some benefits to federalism, and make a note on inequalities that crop up with the federal system that we have, government. Okay, cool. Here we go. Benefits. Let's just start with that. Do good news first. Benefits of federalism. So in our federal system of government, we have the federal government, the national government, and 50 state governments. Okay? Each of those 50 state governments have their own independent areas of power. And all the states sort of share same or similar areas of power. For example, we talked about education in the dual layer cooperative federalism video. There are theoretically, or could be, 50 different types of education systems in this country. What that means is that we as a nation could get to try out and see 50 different types of education systems and see what works and what doesn't work without committing the entire country to a single education system that may work or may fail. Okay? And with having these different, having the states, for example, on education, have control over their own education systems, what works in Massachusetts might not work in Montana. So the states can adapt or modify their own specific education systems to meet the needs of that individual state. That works in some cases, it doesn't work in other cases, and it can cause trouble, which I'll talk about in a minute when I get to inequality. However, the states can become what we might refer to as experimental laboratories. We can allow states to, let's say, innovate around different programs, different ways to do the business of state, and see if it works. So that's benefit number one, or a benefit, that 50 different experimental laboratories. Another benefit to federalism is it offers a check and balance on the power of government. So you have states that have some areas of authority, and you have the federal government that has other areas of authority and power. Now there are some areas where there's maybe some overlap, or the area of authority or who has the authority on a given issue is not clear. And so the states or state and the national government will sort of butt heads over who has power on that maybe subject area on that issue. That butting of heads, or that contesting each other for power over that issue, can prevent government from having too much power, because neither the state nor the federal government can have too much power because they're constantly trying to take power from each other. Okay. Another benefit to federalism is we are a gigantic country. We are huge. We go from the Atlantic to the Pacific. We have Alaska and we have Hawaii. We also have Puerto Rico and Guam, with like all of these different areas that have different struggles or different environments that they're in. What works, again, in Maine might not work in California because of maybe Maine's economy is really different. Maybe Maine, for example, has a lot of rural areas and California has a lot of urban areas. Our federalism system of government allows for Maine and California to sort of do what works best in Maine and California. However, we still have a national government that has a unified vision for the country that can sort of push the country forward in a unified direction, and that can connect all these different states to each other so that the country as a whole works. It's kind of remarkable that America works considering how big the country is and how many different states we have and different divisions of power. But the national government helps make that work, helps make America America. Now, a couple of drawbacks to federalism. One, having power divided like that between state and federal governments and power divided between different state governments can create lots of inefficiencies. You want to talk about government waste? When the federal government and the state governments are constantly butting heads with each other and spending enormous amounts of time and resources and creating bureaucratic red tape over, who has authority or the power over this, one area or another concerning government, policy or issue, that creates a lot of inefficiencies. Whereas if we didn't have a federal system of government, either, the one level of government, whether it be 50 individual states/countries or the one national level of government, could just get in there and do it. Whatever, solve whatever problem that is, do whatever issue needs to be done. However, with all the different states having to try and play nice with each other and the states having to try and play nice with the national government, you get lots of wasted time, energy, money, things like that. Creates a lot of inefficiencies. It can also create a lot of confusion with different rules and regulations. Take, for example, being a lawyer. You have to, if you want to practice law in North Carolina, you have to pass the North Carolina bar and be licensed in North Carolina. However, you can only practice in North Carolina. You can't go practice in South Carolina. To practice in South Carolina, you have to take the South Carolina bar and do South Carolina licensing things to be able to practice in South Carolina. If you want to practice in Virginia, you've got to go through a whole new set of hoops. So if you want to be a lawyer and you're trying to be a lawyer for clients in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, let's say, you've got 3 different systems of licensure, regulations, fees you have to pay, things you have to do to keep up your license or whatever. That can get very confusing. Now, imagine if you're a business and you're trying to operate in all 50 states. That could be 50 different rules and regulations that you have to figure out and abide by and sort of adjust your business practices to meet the rules and regulations of that state. And that can get exhausting and expensive. Whereas if you just had one national level rule and regulation that you knew you had to follow and you knew would be consistent across the country, you wouldn't have to waste as much time or money doing different, business registration fees and making sure your buildings are up to, 50 different codes and things like that. So they can create lots of confusion in another area where it can create lots of inefficiencies. With the different levels of government, there can be more and more levels where corruption can enter into the system. If you have one level of government, the corruption only needs to go to one level, right? All the corruption would be focused on that national level. However, you get a good politician in there who won't get corrupted, you're pretty much protected, right? But if you have politicians at the federal level, politicians at the state level, politicians at the city and county levels, that's a lot of different people where, somebody with a lot of money or power, influence, whatever, can get in and influence all those different politicians and get some leverage or control over the political system. So it allows for lots of different areas, again, for corruption to get into, and it makes it harder for people like you and me to pay attention to what is going on, maybe pay attention to things our politicians are doing that we don't like. If we've got to pay attention to city councilors and commissioners and city government and county commissioners and county government and state legislatures and federal government, Senate and federal legislatures and the bureaucracies that are all up and down that line, that's an impossible task. It's very difficult for us to, I think, hold every single one of those people accountable. If you sort of would smooth that out and eliminate all those different layers, it would be easier to keep track of who's being a corrupt dude and who's not. Now, one final note on inequalities in a federal system, I'd like to talk about the criminal justice system as sort of one major area where the different laws and rules between states can create vastly different rights for and privileges for citizens. With the 50 different states, you have 50 different criminal codes, which means that the same crime could bring with it different punishments in different states. For example, if you smoke up some marijuana in Colorado, you get to have a good time. If you smoke up that same deal in North Carolina, you get a fine or a misdemeanor or something. That's a little weird. We're America. We're all supposedly equal citizens, right? Another big one, this is like the biggest one for me, voting rights and having access to the ballot. There are lots of different ways this takes effect. You know, the state's funding of ballot access for people to be able to vote, the number of hours a state is open for voting. So, you know, one state might have 2 weeks of voting where people can come in and vote. If another state may only have the 1 day for voting. That's a huge difference in the citizens between those states having access and the ability to exercise what is the fundamental part of our democracy, voting. And that personally to me seems nuts. Another issue with voting is again in the criminal justice system. In some states, if you commit a felony, you get your voting rights taken away, maybe for the rest of your life. In other states, you could commit the exact same crime and it could be a felony, but you never get your voting rights taken away from you. That's a big difference. One other big difference is the education system. Education, I think most of us would probably agree, helps formulate our life chances. If we get a good education from a young age, well, we have a better chance at having more money or a better paying job or more options later in life. Now, if you're a kid born in Mississippi, you're not going to have the same level of opportunity in life as if you were a kid born in Massachusetts. The kid in Massachusetts has a much better educational system that they're going to be able to have access to and rely on and learn from, whereas that kid in Mississippi is going to have their life chances severely diminished because they don't have that same access to a quality education. So that would be a note on inequalities that are created when we have 50 different states, 50 different policies and ways governments sort of create policies. Hope that was enjoyable.